My name is Maya Bennett, but everyone calls me May. I'm 34 years old, and last Tuesday my life split into a before and an after when I checked a lottery ticket and realized 6 ordinary numbers on a flimsy slip of paper had matched every single one. $47 million. My hands went numb. My breath felt borrowed. I sat on the edge of my thrift store couch and watched the numbers on my phone like someone watching a horror film slow down. For a long time afterward I did the only sensible thing I could think of. I told no one, not my parents, not my siblings, not even my oldest friend. There are reasons for secrecy in my family, old scars that money can rip open, and I needed to be smart, or at least careful, before I let anyone into this new world. If you're listening to this, tell me where you found this story. Drop a comment with your city. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and about how money bends people, hit like and subscribe. You'll hear how a fortune can expose the people we thought we knew. Before the numbers changed everything, my life was the kind of ordinary that feels invisible. I was an accountant at a small marketing agency, 6 blocks from a river that always seemed to smell faintly of old coffee. 60-hour weeks were normal during the crunch. My apartment was a single bedroom above a laundromat. The rent ate a slice of my paycheck and left me calculating whether buying the good toothpaste this month was an indulgence. Family things were messy. My parents, Robert and Elaine Bennett, split when I was 14, and both remarried quickly. Dad married Vanessa, who worked in real estate and had a taste for things that cost more than my car. Mom married Warren, a local contractor who kept his finances close and his opinions closer. I have 2 siblings, Emma, 30, who looks like a glossy magazine spread, straight teeth, a surgeon for a husband, a house with a lawn, and Marcus, 36, who drifts through jobs and love affairs like a season of bad weather. Marcus is a kind of person who borrows like it's a hobby and never seems to learn the rules of payback. Then there are the extended relatives, the ones who show up on holidays like characters in an old problematic play. Aunt Ruth, tiny, hair pulled back in a practical knot, a retired elementary school teacher with a cat named Dickens, was the one who always brought soup and sincerity. In contrast, Aunt Clarice married well and never let anyone forget it. She has a laugh like cut glass and opinions that sting. Her son Ethan inherited entitlement and a gambling problem that the family politely ignored. I've given money to family before. I emptied my emergency jar to send Marcus $5,000 for rehab 3 years ago. Months later, I learned he'd never checked into a program. I put $2,000 on a credit card for Emma's wedding because she'd cried and said she'd pay me back after the honeymoon. 5 years later, the debt felt like a monument. When Dad needed the roof fixed after a storm, I helped and then watched photos of him and Vanessa basking in Cancun the next month. The one steady friendship I had was Nina. We met in college, and Nina is a nurse who knows what it's like when bills stack up and dignity costs more than you'd think. She listened while I vented, called me out when I started slipping into bitterness, and reminded me, gently but firmly, that not everyone is a taker. At work things were small and annoying. My boss took credit for ideas. My colleague Shane left for coffee and left me with his deadlines. Yet I kept showing up, hoping that steady work would someday look like progress. Buying lottery tickets was the small indulgence I allowed myself. Every Friday I spent $10 on chance and hope. My mother called it a tax on people who can't math. Marcus joked I could give him the money instead. Dad lectured on odds and statistics. Still, there's something about choosing numbers, birthdays, anniversaries, little secret codes that strings hope through the gray of ordinary life. The morning I bought the winning ticket I'd turned, the week had been another grind. Arnold at the office took credit for a presentation that had been mine. I'd stayed late piece it together. On a whim I stopped at Leo's Market and handed over $20 instead of my usual Leo, a man who'd run that corner store for decades, called out, "Happy birthday, May." I shrugged the attention away and asked for my usual +1 extra. Instead of letting the machine spit a quick pick, I decided to pick my own numbers. I dialed my life into those 6 squares, 3 for my birth month, 16 for the day, 12 and 21 for my parents' birthdays, 9 for Aunt Ruth, 30 for Nina. I walked out with a paper weight that suddenly felt like a key. That night I ordered Thai and opened a cheap bottle of wine Nina had given me. The drawing was at 8. I scrolled through social media, flinching at people's celebrations. At 8:30 I remembered the ticket, and with the casual disbelief of someone who never wins, checked my phone. 3, 16, 12, 21, 9, 30. My remote slipped from my fingers. I rewound the televised drawing and watched it again. It was real. The lottery website confirmed it. I was the sole winner, 47 million. After taxes, a number my brain couldn't compute, 28 million. Give or take an amount that suddenly made coupons and rent receipts look like the papers of a former life. I didn't sleep. Instead I read everything I could find about people who won big. The stories were a bible of warnings. Families shredded by greed, friendships that turned transactional, winners who were bankrupt inside 5 years. The more I read, the higher the wall I built between that ticket and everyone else. I would claim the prize quiet. I would tell no, at least not yet. I would think, plan, and protect. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, and made an appointment with Adrian Cole, an attorney who specialized in handling large financial windfalls. His office was downtown, glass and calm. I felt absurd sitting there in a sweater with threadbare elbows and a paper ticket between my fingers. You can keep your anonymity if you structure this correctly, Adrian said after a long look at the ticket. He explained trusts and blind entities, the taxes, the pitfalls winners fall into when they tell too many people too fast. Money does strange things to human behavior, he said, and I believed him. We set up a trust. We built a safe, sensible financial plan. I kept my job at least for now. An immediate lifestyle change would call attention. That was something I wanted to avoid. I'd lived 2 lives, the familiar one with the laundromat detergent coupons, and a private one that breathed a little easier when bills came due. The secrecy felt heavy, and at times lonely. I kept catching myself watching my family the way you watch a painting you suddenly think you understand, searching for brushstrokes, for patterns, and a question began to form. What if I could test them? What if there was a way to see who would be with me when the account was empty, without telling anyone about the vault I'd quietly built? The idea took root like a stubborn weed. I would craft a story where I needed help, $5,000 to tide me through a sudden job loss, then present the same plea to each family member and watch who stepped forward. Not a huge amount, not a scandalous sum, just enough to expose who saw me as a person, and who saw me as an agent. I ran the plan by Nina because I needed someone who knew me and could tell me when I was being foolish. She raised an eyebrow. May, this feels cruel, she said. Why not tell them how you feel? Be honest. Because honesty with them is a conversation that turns into lectures, guilt trips, and excuses. I answered. I want to see who actually shows up if they think I'm down. She frowned, but she agreed to help. We rehearsed the story. The company had been sued. An embezzlement scandal had emerged. The agency fell overnight. Details crisp but not theatrical. I'd say my emergency fund had been drained by medical tests. I needed $5,000 to cover rent and time until something better came up. Each family member would hear the same script. No leading. No hints. I made a list. Mom and Warren, Dad and Vanessa, Emma and Paul, Marcus, Aunt Ruth, Aunt Clarice, Ethan. 10 people. All had turned to me at some point. All had accepted help. Now I would see how they behaved when the roles were reversed. The first call was to Mom. She answered on the 3rd ring and sounded distracted. I told the story. She expressed sympathy and immediately looked for other people to handle the problem. Warren and I just put a deposit on the lake house, she said, voice careful. Have you asked your father? Have you asked Emma? Paul has a steady job. There was concern but also a quick attempt to shuffle responsibility. She offered to talk to Warren and see what they could do but gave no firm promise. I noted her answer in the small journal I kept, a ledger of reactions. Dad's response was predictably instructional. I told you to keep 6 months of expenses. he said in the patient, disappointed tone he'd used when I was young. He lectured on budgets, then explained that he and Vanessa were focusing on retirement, and could not afford to help. Not an offer, not even a promise, just practical detachment. Emma invited me into her immaculate kitchen. She showed genuine shock, then careful hesitation. "We just bought a new Audi," she said apologetically. "Paul handles our finances." "Let me talk to him," she offered to call back. Her eyes avoided mine when I asked whether moving in temporarily might help. It was a consolation that carried weight, but not commitment. Marcus was radio silence. A text, "That sucks, tight here too," and then silent. He had borrowed from me before with tearful promises, so his absence hurt deeper than it probably should have. Vanessa bluntly refused. "Maybe it's a sign you should choose a more lucrative career," she said without softness. Warren added that I wasn't his responsibility. Aunt Clarice sniffed judgment, and made a point of how my career choices had led me here. Ethan was sympathetic in text, and virtual promises of lunch, and then a rescheduling that never happened. Then there was Aunt Ruth. She called before I'd even reached her. Her voice held worry and warmth. She offered lunch help, and when we met at a tiny diner, an envelope. "I want you to take this," she said, pushing it across the table. It was $1,000, nearly everything she could spare. She insisted I take it and made an offer I had not expected. Her couch, if I needed a place to stay. Something in my chest gave when I learned how much she'd sacrificed to help me. Ruth's savings were almost all she had. Her medication costs had risen quietly. She'd been tutoring evenings to make ends meet. She gave me $3,000 and a sofa and did it without spectacle or expectation. That night I invited her over. I brewed tea and told her the truth. I hadn't lost my job. The agency was fine. I'd lied to test them. Ruth considered me for a long minute. "Are you angry with me?" I asked, afraid she'd leave. She shook her head. "Sad," she said finally. "Sad you felt you needed to ask." Then she told me an old story, a marriage, an inheritance, a husband who'd forged her signature and vanished with the money. She taught me a lesson without scolding. Money reveals who people are and who we are when it's at stake. I told her the rest, the numbers, the lawyers, the trust set up like a fortress. She listened, then smiled in a way that felt like a benediction. "Money doesn't buy love," she said, "but it buys choices. Use them well." I left Adrian's office later that week with plans, a trust for Ruth, a foundation that would serve the old and lonely, and a new life that would take shape slow and careful. I told no one else. I told Nina, who laughed and called me and asked whether I'd still clip coupons. I told myself I would not do anything extravagant. I wanted to be cautious, kind and quiet, but a seed of something else had sprouted. The truth about who my family was when I had nothing to give, and who would be there when I had everything. The experiment had hurt. They always do when you test trust, but it also cleared space. The numbers had shown me the contours of who would remain. The story is only starting. There are choices to be made. Who stays in, who learns nothing, and how does a person rebuild when money hands them the power to change more than their own life? I had plans. I'd start with Ruth. I'd make sure she never had to worry again about prescriptions, or a leaking roof, or tutoring hours. Then maybe I'd step back. But the secret of the lottery hung around me like a second skin, and secrets are heavy. The next morning I'd meet with Adrian again to structure a trust that would protect Ruth without turning charity into humiliation. I would also begin to think about how to handle the rest of my family, those whose silence had been a kind of reckoning. Their reactions had taught me something that money never could. The people worth keeping are the ones who stay when the accounts are empty. And yet the feeling of power, the pulse of choice, was intoxicating. I had the chance to rewrite how I related to people. I had a chance to make something good. I just had to be careful not to let the money reshape me into the very thing I feared. This is where the story bent. I'd planned to keep everything close to the chest, to act quietly, and to let the truth reveal itself on its own terms. But when you hold a fortune in your hands, and people you love have asked you for so much, secrecy becomes a test you can't help but fail. Next, the family meeting. I called everyone and asked them to come over. I'd tell them something important. What I didn't say was that the announcement would be a litmus test, an invitation that would reveal everything I'd been learning. They arrived curious. They expected drama. What they didn't expect was the truth, nor how I would use it. The living room was too small for all of them, and their eyes were too large for the small talk. They brought casseroles and opinions. Mom's smile was tight. Dad's throat worked like he was swallowing a lecture. Emma arrived with the perfect posture of someone who lives in a world where money is a tool that makes life look tidy. Marcus walked in late, like he'd imagined timing would excuse him. Vanessa wore a dress that cost more than my monthly rent. Clarice carried a dessert and a judgment, and Ruth. She entered last, as always, carrying a quiet light. She hugged me and sat on the torn armchair like she belonged there more than anyone else. For a moment the room held the smell of cinnamon from the pie and the static charge of things that are about to change. "Thanks for coming," I said, voice steady. "I know there have been rumors. I wanted to talk about them." The room leaned in. We all act like family is a single organism. But in my family it was more like a room full of people who occasionally shared DNA and grudges. "I'm fine," I continued. "Actually, I've been fine. I've got a new job that's better and I'm transitioning into it." That was half the truth. I'd named the nonprofit executive director and written myself a modest salary. It felt like a candle's warmth in a cold room. Faces softened. Dad's shoulders relaxed. "That's good," he said. "This will be a turning point." I watched each of them. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then I locked eyes with Marcus. "Marcus," I said. "Remember last Christmas when you asked me for $3,000 for rent?" His face tightened. "Yeah?" He squirmed like a teenager caught in a lie. "I was going through things. I didn't have the cash. You called me when you needed something." My words weren't venomous. They were a ledger. "You didn't call back." Emma's lips pressed into a line. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Vanessa's jaw clicked like a hinge. I walked them through the list. Who had offered help? Who had made promises they didn't keep? Who had offered lectures instead of hands? The room filled with excuses and sighs and justification. They had no language for what honesty sounded like when it wasn't wrapped in blame. "I don't owe anyone an explanation," I said finally. "But I do expect reciprocity in relationships. If you've needed me in the past, you can't vanish when I need something small. That's not normal." There was no roar of shame. There were small defenses, and a terrible revealing. The family had turned my need into proof of character, not an opportunity to show compassion. They judged me for asking, rather than offering help. Aunt Clarice sniffed and said, "Maybe you dramatize things. Maybe you enjoy feeling like the warder." After the awkward hour, Peerball filed out with stiff goodbyes and promises to call that felt like the end of a play. Ruth stayed behind and washed the coffee cups with the same gentle care she always put into small tasks. "You did what you needed to do," she said when we were alone. "You learned. That's a kind of grace." I felt unmoored and strangely solid. The meeting had confirmed what the experiment had teased out. Some of them cheered from the sidelines when I stumbled. Others were absent when I reached for a hand. The money had not created this gulf. It had only revealed where the bridges had been burned. That night, I met Adrian at his office to finalize the trust for Ruth. I wanted her to be secure without the humiliating spectacle of a handout. Adrian suggested a monthly stipend inside a family fund. No lump sums, no fanfare. Something Ruth could accept with dignity. "You want to help, not humiliate," he said, tapping the contract. "This is structured so she never has to manage a windfall. It's a gift that looks like regular income." It felt right. I signed the papers with a steady hand, and then stopped at a charity registry on my way home to start the nonprofit's incorporation. The name I chose, Hands and Hearth, felt simple and stubborn, like a promise. Weeks turned into a rhythm. I worked my day job, and in secret, met with financial advisors, and architects, and people who knew how to make grants work. I bought Ruth a small bungalow not far from me. 1-story wide doorways, a yard with roses she could tend. The house was modest, functional, and exactly the kind of ordinary comfort she deserved. I kept the money anonymous. When Dad had a heart scare and the bills stacked up, I paid through the hospital's assistance program. When Ethan finally checked into rehab, I covered it anonymous. There was a low brilliance in helping and leaving it unnamed. It felt like controlling the story of my generosity, instead of letting it be used as currency. People noticed little things. Emma's kitchen Reno made different kinds of headlines at family brunch. Marcus called asking for a small loan for a business idea, and got the polite firm refusal I'd learned how to give. Clarice commented on how I'd become self-important, and Vanessa asked, pointedly, whether I'd considered downsizing my apartment. Some temptations arrived like unwanted guests. The idea of telling everyone at once, broadcasting the numbers, the trust, the story of an ordinary person suddenly wealthy, had a gleam of vindication, but that gleam dulled when I imagined their sudden affection. Calls at midnight, offers to help that were really offers to take. The more I pictured it, the more I saw how little had changed and who they were. One evening, Nina and I sat on my patio with wine, watching the porch light on Ruth's new house blink like a heartbeat. "Are you happy?" she asked. "I'm safer," I said. "I'm less anxious. I can do work I love. I can give Ruth a house. But happiness feels stranger now. Part of me wants to shout it from rooftops. Another part wants to guard it like a secret." "You're protecting yourself," Nina said. "That's sensible." "I'm also protecting the truth," I said. "If I told them their love could be, that would make both them and me fragile." Nina nodded. "So you'll make the changes quietly, keep your circle small, use the money to fix things that matter." I left the accounting firm with notice, transitioned to Hands and Hearth as its director, and learned the messy sweetness of building something from scratch. We matched volunteers with seniors who needed company, we fixed leaking roofs, and replaced lost teeth in denture clinic. The work grounded me in a way spreadsheets never had. Ruth's health improved. She volunteered at the library and taught reading circles. She baked pies that smelled like Thanksgiving in August. We had weekly dinners and long, honest talks about the ugly and the good. When she asked if she could help me with the garden, I let her, because she wanted to give back, not because she needed to. There were moments, no dramatic confrontations, no cinematic revelations, when people came to me with problems and I chose anonymity. When Dad needed a specialist he couldn't afford, the bill was paid without his knowing. When Ethan returned home humbler and quieter, his rehab covered without announcements. I liked it this way. They could be who they were, and I could decide when and if to intervene. And still there were tests. Marcus launched a startup that looked suspiciously like a hobby with eat-up cash. Emma posted photos from a beach resort, and complained loudly about countertop colors. Clarice lectured on the ethics of philanthropy as if money broadcast ethics like a sermon. They pushed, I held. One afternoon Marcus knocked on my door and said, "May, I heard you had a windfall. Can you help me get started? I promise I've got a plan." "Where did you hear that?" I asked. "Word gets around. Does it matter? If you can help, that'd be great." It mattered. It mattered because rumors were now knocking on my door. And rumors have teeth. I told him no. I told him I'd learned how to say no to people who took and never learned to give. He left angry and bitter, but anger, I'd come to understand, is easier to navigate than dependence. A year later, Hands and Hearth had helped hundreds of seniors. Nina ran outreach. Ruth had a steady stipend and a small house that fit her like a familiar shawl. I drove a slightly newer Corolla with a trusted mechanic and kept clipping coupons. People in my life had shifted into roles that felt truer. Nina, the friend. Ruth, the family that loved without counting. Marcus, the lesson I'd let go of. Emma, someone with whom I could be polite. Clarice, a mirror I didn't need to polish. And yet the secret pulsed. Sometimes I imagined telling them, watching cameras cut to close-ups of stunned faces. That would have been satisfying in a small human way. But I didn't want their love to be tendered at the price of my bank statement. I wanted love that arrived without receipt. Then came the unexpected. An anonymous letter left at my mailbox one morning. No name, no return, just a note. "You have the chance to use money to change things for the better. Don't let pride get in the way." It tasted like judgment and hope at once. I didn't know who had written it. I suspected someone who'd benefited or someone who'd watched. Part of me wanted to trace it and offer thanks. Part of me wanted to keep the mystery. There is an odd freedom in giving without recognition. It's like gardening in the dark. Roots deepen even when you never see the bloom. One evening Ruth asked me quietly, "Do you ever regret keeping it a secret?" "No," I said. "Not yet. I regret the tests I put people through, but the clarity I gained. Yes, I'd rather keep the peace and the truth between us than watch people pretend. She smiled and squeezed my hand. You did good, May. You did what needed doing. There were more choices ahead. How public would Hands in Hearth become? How much of the foundation's work would be visible? How much would I hold back to protect myself and Ruth? Being a millionaire had given me the chance to be generous without being used, but it had also given me the power to redraw boundaries. And with power comes the temptation to punish, to reward, to prove a point. I decided to teach rather than punish. I would build an organization that offered dignity, not pity. I would teach people to give without demanding an accounting. I would never use money as a weapon, but secrets have a way of slipping out, particularly when you're related to people who find rumor irresistible. A careless post, a well-meaning volunteer who mentioned a generous donor, a neighbor who liked to speculate, little leaks that can turn into rivers. I watched for signs and guarded against them. And then, one ordinary Tuesday while I was at a community meeting, my phone buzzed with a message from Emma. Can we talk? It's urgent. The word urgent made my stomach drop. I called back and found out something I hadn't expected, something that would test the boundaries I'd built and force me to decide how much truth to reveal. Next, Emma's plea. She will ask for help in a way she never did before. Will I respond with open hands, or will I keep the ledger closed? The answer will test whether generosity can live without announcement, and whether secrets can survive curiosity. The choices I make now will not only shape my family ties, but the foundation I'm building for strangers who need more than money. They need dignity. Emma's voice over the phone was smaller than usual. We have a situation, May, she said. Paul's mother's estate, there's a legal mess. We might need help with lawyer fees. Esther Avenue, where Emma and Paul lived, always smelled of lemon cleaner and new furniture. Their worries usually came with cash in reserve and a plan. Her asking felt different, like the knock of reality on a well-insulated door. Tell me what you need, I said, keeping my tone even. It's complicated, she replied. If we don't get this sorted, Paul's practice could be affected. I don't want to alarm Mom and Dad. Can you help? Maybe 10,000? It's temporary. 10,000 was a lot more than the 5,000 of the experiment. I thought of Ruth's house and the nonprofit's payroll. I thought of Marcus and his hopeful texts. I thought of the anonymous note in my mailbox, and whether pride was starting to feel like a vice. I said I needed to think about it. We planned to meet at her house that evening. When I arrived, the house seemed smaller somehow, boxed in by its own perfection. Emma served wine with a practiced air. Paul was polite, but strained. They laid out the story. Disputed will, unexpected creditors, and a law firm that wanted a retainer. We can't ask Dad and Vanessa, Emma whispered. They'll make a scene. We don't want to involve them. The implication was clear. They wanted quiet help, not pity. I listened. When the plea landed, the old impulse, help the family, pulled hard. For a second I imagined a world where my secret was a bridge to smoother sailing, where no one needed to pretend in the face of trouble. But another part of me was colder and more measured. The year of tests had taught me lessons in firm boundaries. Generosity is noble, but it mustn't be a ladder others expect to climb for free. 10,000 is a big ask, I said. How much of this can you cover yourselves? Emma looked uncomfortable. We can do half. Paul can get a line of credit. We'd really appreciate it. There was 100 other reasons to say no. Part of me wanted to teach them a lesson about self-reliance. Part of me wanted to show them the cost of coldness. But Ruth's face hovered in my mind. The look of someone who gave the last of her savings, and asked nothing. I didn't want to punish Emma for the family's failings. I offered 5,000, exactly what I'd used as the test. It was enough to get them through the immediate retainer. Emma cried, actual tears, and hugged me with an intensity that felt like relief and entitlement. Braided together. That night I paid the bill anonymously, through a trust account. Emma thanked me profusely, and promised to pay me back when they could. I accepted the promise with caution. A month later, a series of messages started circulating in the family group chat. Photos of a new garden Thomas and Paul had installed. A dinner at a club with friends. Offhand posts about how stressful those legal things can be. I watched the timeline like a traffic camera and felt something like disappointment. Then comes the twist. Paul got promoted at a new clinic. A high-paying position. Emma wrote a casual message about how grateful she was for stability. The gratitude was warm, but it didn't come with the humility I'd hoped for. I felt used, not because I'd helped, but because my help had been taken as a resource rather than a lifeline. I sat with that feeling, and tried to turn it into something constructive. If the money made people feel entitled, silence could make them forget. I chose to keep giving, but with a condition. Help without request would be anonymous, and the funds would be allocated through programs that required dignity and accountability. For families who needed legal help, Hands and Hearth set up a small legal aid fund. That way, support came with structure and privacy. It kept the family dynamics from poisoning the care. She took to gardening with the sort of focus people reserve for prayer. She taught neighborhood kids to read, and they taught her how to use a smartphone. She'd invited a few neighbors over for tea. People who brought casseroles without expectation. But secrets leaked. A conversation at a volunteer meeting. Someone thanking an anonymous donor, combined with a nosy neighbor, started the rumor wheel. It didn't take long for a whisper to become a family theory. Someone mentioned a generous benefactor in the neighborhood. And someone else thought of me. I hadn't told anyone. But my life is not a vault without seams. Money travels through the world like water, finding cracks. When the rumor reached Emma, her curiosity roused. "Do you know anything?" she asked one night, when we ran into each other at a school fundraiser. "Not really," I said. "Why?" "Just wondering," she said. Voice casual, but anger simmers in casual tones. She had always expected more from me. I didn't make a decision then. I wanted to be sure. And then Marcus made another move. He called with a pitch that smelled like the old patterns. "May, I've got a partner. We're launching an app. We need seed money. I can pay you back." Seed money. Partnership. Payback, words that had once been promises, and then vanishers. "No," I said, "I can't invest in that." He didn't ask again. Instead, he tried another route. A friend of a friend who connected him to a lease on a van for a side business. Marcus's resilience is admirable. His responsibility is not, but the quiet refusal changed something in him. He started to look for work more seriously. A different kind of test arrived at my doorstep in the form of Ethan, my cousin, who had been admitted to a rehab after years of gambling. He called and said he was ready. He said the rehab needed funds. This time, I said yes, fully, openly, and I drove him there and sat in the shaky circle where apologies were raw and glances heavier than shame. After Ethan began treatment, something unexpected happened. He wrote a letter, an old-fashioned, handwritten thing that arrived on my porch like an offering. He thanked me, not for the money, but for being the person who made him face the truth. "You probably don't want anything from me," he wrote, "but you changed my life." The letter landed in a small pocket of light inside me. It reminded me why charity matters, why holding back the spectacle and giving quietly means something different. It was proof that money could be medicine if given with care. But the family tensions simmered. Clarice began to gossip. Subtle digs about how philanthropy can corrupt. Am I using my money as a weapon? It hurt to hear her calibrate my choices like a sermon. She criticized my nonprofit and then asked me, pointedly, about transparency. "If you're doing so much, why not say so?" People deserve credit. I thought about the cost of credit. Credit can become a currency that buys favors. I thought about the week I'd spent watching the faces at my family meeting, and how quickly warmth curdled into claims. "No," I told her, "I don't need credit, I need impact." Nina and I were at an event for seniors when someone from the media called and asked if Hands and Hearth would accept an interview. I said no at first. Publicity could be good for fundraising, but it risked turning private kindness into spectacle. We decided to accept controlled exposure, a small feature about the organization's mission without mentioning donors. This balance, privacy versus visibility, was a slippery rope. The more lives we touched, the greater the risk of exposure. The more successful our programs became, the more likely someone would want to trace the money. I held firm to a principle: donors can remain anonymous if they choose, but the work itself must be public and replicable. Then, unexpectedly, one of the very people who had disappointed me came through in a startling way. Dad, quiet, practical, always lecturing, was diagnosed with a serious condition that required surgery. He'd been stubborn about going to the doctor. He'd been stubborn about everything. The call that came to my phone felt like the one that wakes you to the edge of the bed. I arranged for treatment through the foundation and coordinated care without his knowledge. The hospital called later with a bewildered voice. Someone covered the remaining balance, and they didn't want to be identified. I listened to the voice on the other end and felt something complex wash through me. I had helped the man who'd lectured me. I had done it without theater. That anonymity felt like a kind of moral victory. I could be generous without giving anyone the opportunity to claim credit. When Dad recovered, he called with a voice softer than I'd heard in years. "Thank you, May. I don't know how to repay you." I said nothing. That silence said more than words could. Gratitude, when it comes unbought, is a currency I valued. But the family continued to press at the seams. An anonymous tip to a local blog linked Hands and Hearth to an unnamed donor and then circled to speculation about my name. Comments flourished. Congratulations intertwined with bitter accusations. Why keep this secret? Why give anonymously and not share? The blog's next headline was a thinly sourced piece about a mysterious benefactor in the neighborhood, followed by a comment from someone who'd seen a woman delivering packages to Ruth. The post linked back to my social media in a way that made my heart stop. For a moment I considered stepping out into the light. I considered standing and saying, "I did this. I did it because I chose to." But then I thought of the showy versions of charity ribbons and plaques and dinners, where gratitude is paraded, and I recoiled. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do: keep the focus on the work. I responded to the blog with a public statement about Hands and Hearth's mission, and an invitation for volunteers. I said nothing about donors. I let the work speak. The fallout was quieter than I expected. Some family members speculated, others kept their distance, and the work grew. A donor matched gifts. A small grant arrived because of visibility, and Hands and Hearth expanded into a program that provided in-home assist. One night, Ruth and I sat on her porch watching a neighbor boy chase a firefly. "You did good," she said. "You did the right thing by keeping some things secret. Not everything needs the light." I'm learning that boundaries are a form of respect. For them, for me, for the people we help. Ruth smiled and patted my hand. "You should sleep more," she said. "You look like you carry the moon on your shoulders." How to balance family expectations with the broader mission. Money magnified everything, but it also clarified. It made visible the people who deserved a place in my life, and the ones who would only visit when it was comfortable. Just when I thought I had steadied it, a darker twist arrived. One I hadn't accounted for. A lawyer, representing a small but persistent collection agency, sent a letter to my apartment, looking for an old debt from a company I once audited. It was thin evidence, and the address was wrong, but the letter named me in a way that could, if mishandled, attract attention. The agency started calling, and small rumors swelled into something that smelled like trouble. I called Adrian. He told me to stay calm, that this was likely a prank or a mistake, but the letters continued, then doubled, then arrived to Ruth's new address, with the wrong name but a correct hint linking us. Someone was poking around. Who was poking? Was it a family member trying to stir the pot, a curious neighbor trying to connect dots, or simply noise? The uncertainty felt like a low-grade panic. Secrets are fragile, and once the chink appears, everyone leans in. Next, the letters escalate. The rumor mill spins faster, and someone unexpected shows up demanding proof. I will have to decide how much to reveal when the world begins to sniff around a life I curated as private, and whether protecting that privacy is the same as protecting the mission I built. The letters multiplied until they were a small storm on my porch. Each one arrived with a polite debt collector's tone, some misapplied fees, and a name that didn't belong to me but was close enough to sting. Maya Bennett, CO Hands and Heart. At first Adrian called them what they probably were. Scams, sloppy clerical errors, but then a man's voice left a voicemail on my phone that felt like a match struck close to the skin. "We have a right to know who's funding your operations," he said. No name. No law firm. Just an insinuation that made me cold. He best didn't want headlines. I didn't want a scandal. I wanted the work to breathe and grow without being a story that people could monetize. I called a close circle: Adrian, Nina, and Ruth. We sat in my kitchen and made quiet plans. "We can handle this legally," Adrian said. "We fight it as harassment. We can send a cease and desist, and we can trace where these letters came from. But if it is a smear campaign, the best defense is transparency about the nonprofit, not about donors." "Then we show what we do," Nina said. "Not who gave the money." He best Ruth nodded. "Let them come. The truth is patient." We put together a press packet that talked about Hands and Heart's impact stories, photos, testimonials, without donor names. We emphasized the mission and the results. The press people loved it. Potent, low drama. Despite the strategy, the rumor made its way to family gossip like a weed finds cracks in a sidewalk. A cousin called, her voice suspicious, and asked pointed questions. Mom texted me, tentative and a little sharp, "Is this true? Are you behind the foundation fund?" I thought of the year of tests and the ledger of responses. I could reveal everything and watch the room change. Or I could hold the line. Things that are given in secret sometimes yield the best fruit. They are soil, not spectacle. I chose to protect the dignity of the people we serve. We sent legal notices to the collection agency. They were nonsense, an artifact of sloppy data entry, or a bad faith attempt at leverage. Within a week the calls slowed. The letters stopped. I slept a little better. But the pressure had shaken things loose. Someone in the neighborhood had noticed the house on Ruth Street, had seen a woman carrying boxes, and had matched the details in a way that leaked the rumor into a small local blog. The blog ran an innocuous piece about a local benefactor. A week later a reporter called, asking for an interview about the mysterious donor. Ibestreistrin. I agreed to an interview on my terms. We would focus on the program, the volunteers, and the seniors we served. I would say nothing about donors. The piece ran and brought donations and volunteers. Hands and Hearth grew larger, not because of the rumor alone, but because the work was visible and real. People were moved by stories of repaired roofs and visits that kept someone from spiraling into loneliness. The growth brought new questions. How do you scale care without becoming the person you once fled from? How do you preserve dignity when the need is big and the world loves a name to attach to a donation? We started a mobile help unit that fixed home hazards. We built a small legal fund to support seniors with wills and medical directives. We hired staff and built processes. I learned to manage budgets at a scale that made my old spreadsheets look like the practice round. Meanwhile, family dynamics continued to shift. Emma learned humility the way a garden learns frost, slowly and painfully. She called less for help and more to listen. Marcus, under the pressure of being ignored and the reality of having to work, found a steady job and started saving. Clarice stayed Clarice, and that was fine. She showed up to the annual fundraiser and dropped a check in a way that felt performative and true at once. One autumn, when the leaves were the color of old coins, I was blindsided by a meeting request from my mother. I went and found a woman who had the neat lines of someone who'd always been careful with expectations. Maya May, she said. I heard about the foundation. I heard you've been helping people. I wanted to say I'm proud. Her hand on mine felt like a confession. I didn't know how to say this before. We never really saw you, but this is something. I could have told her everything. I could have explained the ticket and the trust, and the way the ledger of favors had balanced out in my head. Instead, I let the moment be about her meeting me as an adult, not as the child who once needed lectures. "I'm glad it matters to you," I said. "That's enough." By then the secret had morphed into something quieter, not an act of deception, but a way of protecting the people I loved and the work we did. I had money, yes, but I had also made choices about how to use it. And those choices were not always about punishing those who'd been They were about preserving the dignity of people like Ruth and Ethan, and the hundreds of others who needed more than charity. They needed systems that respected them. A year after the storm of letters, a booker called with a request. Would I be willing to speak in public about the nonprofit's model? I agreed. I told a few harmless anecdotes about seniors and supply drive. I told the truth about impact and care and left out the glittering details of the funding. The talk went well. Volunteers came forward. Hands and Hearth finally had a partnership with a city program that expanded surf. Then something happened that changed the ledger entirely. A journalist with a friendlier tone asked me a question no one had honestly asked aloud. "Why keep the money secret?" she said, looking directly into the microphone. "Why not show people that generosity can come from anyone?" The question was surgical. I thought about the dinners where family members had offered advice about career choices, and the lecture my father loved to give. I thought about Ruth's quiet generosity and Ethan's raw letter. "Because some gifts are better when they don't change the giver," I said, "and because the work matters more than the applause." The piece went viral in a small way, and with it came an unexpected shift. People wrote to the foundation with offers to volunteer, to match donations, to start local chapters. The work ceased to be a private project and became a move. I kept the donor list private, but the movement was public. Even with growth, secrets keep their edges. Sometimes I woke at night and thought about the ticket, the exact 6 numbers that had rearranged my life. I thought about the way money obliges us, and the way it reveals a truth, that people will show who they are when giving becomes inconvenient. Then the final reckoning arrived in a letter that was not legal and not rumor. It was from Marcus and signed in a way I hadn't expected. For everything and nothing, he'd sent a short note and an envelope. Inside, $300 and a list of small changes he had made, an application for classes, a new job schedule, a willingness to pay me back in honest, slow installments. It would have been small and quiet, like so much that mattered. I called him and we met at a bus stop and talked like people who had moved past theater. He thanked me for refusing to be a mattress for his failures. He thanked me for setting boundaries. He meant it, clumsily but genuine. We left with a different kind of connection than we had before, less frantic, less transactional. One evening on Ruth's porch, with a sky the color of worn pennies, she said, "You taught them better than they taught themselves." Yes, you did. You gave them a chance to change. We sat for a long time, both of us watching the horizon, where the sun had left a smear of pink. "You did something brave, Ruth. You gave without strings, kept your dignity, and used the money like a tool for mending, rather than a weapon." I didn't see it as brave. I saw it as necessary. I had been given a choice and I used it to build a life that matched my value. Money had been the catalyst, but the real work was how I chose to move in the world after the shock of the windfall. The years gathered like pages. Hands and Hearth became a model some cities wanted to replicate. Ruth hosted book clubs where she read aloud to children and to seniors. Nina ran outreach and occasionally teased me about my coupon clipping. Sometimes people asked whether I ever regretted the secrecy. My answer was always the same: I have no regrets about protecting dignity. Secrets, properly tended, can keep good things safe. If you take anything from this story, take this. Wealth does not purify people, it reveals them. If you ever find yourself with more than you need, remember the small ordinary people who teach you how to be human. Don't let money remake your heart, let it help the world quietly and well. Have you ever tested someone's loyalty? Did it change how you saw them? Share your story in the comments. If this story moved you, like and subscribe for more real-life moments that force us to rethink family and loyalty. Thank you for listening. May you find the clarity to see who belongs in your life, not because they take, but because they stay.